All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Todd O'Hare. I'm the president and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce, and this is the first in a series of webinars that we are intending to do focused on the issue of data centers. There's been a lot of information that's been flowing around out in Montana over the last few weeks related to data centers. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation associated with that information that's being floated around. Some of that's due to a lack of quality information, and some of it is intentionally misleading. And so our intention here is to just start peeling apart this issue of data centers. It's a emerging issue here in Montana, and there are a lot of legitimate questions about this. And so I think it's fair for us to go down this road with an eye of like, we've got a lot we need to learn about this. And so this is part of our intent. So as we go through today's webinar, if there are other particular issues that you think would be helpful to bring in some experts to discuss, just shoot those in the chat room there, and we'll pick those up. But we're looking at, as we go forward, a discussion around water consumption, a discussion around what the regulatory environment will look like for permitting data centers in Montana, some of the environmental impacts, a tax implication, which I think will be a really interesting sort of discussion around what are the tax implications associated with data centers coming in. And then there are data centers that are currently operating in Montana. We just don't hear about them. And so we'll bring in some folks that are currently operating some data centers already in Montana to try to demystify this issue as a whole. Real briefly, the Montana Chamber of Commerce, we're guided by a strategic plan that was put in place in 2016 that was developed by our membership. And our membership told us to focus in four main areas in order to improve Montana's overall economy. And those four areas that they told us to focus on in 2016 were issues around business climate, like taxes and regulations and judicial environment. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, wastewater treatment systems, access to high-speed internet and broadband. Workforce development was an issue that come up regularly in 2016 that business leaders told us that we need to focus on over the course of the next 10 years. And the final one was entrepreneurship, because it was recognized that that is a strength of Montana's economy, and it creates wealth both in rural and in urban Montana, and that we should go at that with intention. So that was a 10-year strategic plan. It really focused the efforts of this organization over the last 10 years. In fact, our last legislative session in 2025, we engaged in more than 200 different legislative bills, and we had a 75% success rate in those 200 bills, which mean those bills that we wanted to get tabled in committee or killed on the floor, that occurred, or the bills that we wanted to pass, those bills passed. And so a 75% success rate is a very high success rate. And it speaks to the importance of us as we go forward, focusing on the right issues, because we can leverage the strength and the authority of this organization if we're looking at the right target. And so as we go forward, this issue of energy and technology are emerging as likely targets for our next strategic plan. Energy was not an issue that was brought up in 2016 by any business leader throughout the state of Montana. It is regularly being brought up today as concerns of around reliability and affordability emerge. And that was even before the data center discussion became prevalent in Montana. And technology and innovation is another one that's coming up, because technology and innovation are pervasive in our work life and in our personal lives. There are a lot of threats associated with that, and a lot of opportunities associated with that, given Montana's growth in the high-tech space, particularly in the western part of the state. The reason I bring all that up is that these two issues that are emerging as strategic pillars for the Montana Chamber of Commerce have merged into a single topic here around data centers that encompasses both the energy and electricity demand and supply side of this, and also the technology and innovation side. And so we're honored here today to have Bob Morris. Bob is the Lance Energy Chair at Montana Tech. He's got a particular lane of expertise in energy in general and electricity generation specifically. He spent 28 years at the Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories and retired as the Chief Engineering Services Officer. His technical background includes extensive experience designing and commissioning electric power system protection and control solutions for utility. Bob has a BS in geophysical engineering and a master's in engineering science from Montana Tech. And so today, Bob is going to walk us through kind of the electricity generation side of this discussion around data centers and give kind of a larger sort of picture of what's going on in the energy space in Montana and our region. And I think he'll also point out through his presentation why this is an issue that's becoming a strategic importance to this organization on behalf of the business community. We are recording this part of the session. When Bob concludes his presentation, we'll stop the recording and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And for Q&A, if you'll just raise your hand and then we'll be able to unmute you. You can ask the question or you can shoot me a question in the chat room and we can ask it that way. But we want to make sure that we leave some sufficient time for some questions and answers specifically around electricity generation and supply in Montana as it's related to data centers. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Todd. It's my pleasure to join today. Can you hear me okay?
You bet.
All right, good. Glad everything's working. And I want to thank everyone participating for the honor of your time today. And so what I want to do is go ahead and jump in real quick here. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. And Sheridan, if you'll let me know that it works out okay. So you should see a screen a full screen that says just the facts. Is it coming in okay?
Yep.
All right, good. So just by way of background, so why am I here today is, well, my position as the Lance Energy Chair is a lot of it is on public energy education. So this is right in my lane. I'm also electric power guy. I've worked in the industry for 40 years, and I'm also a member of Governor Gianforte's Energy Task Force here in Montana and the Butte Silver Bow Data Center Ad Hoc Committee. So I've spent a fair amount of time researching this. And so what I want to do is first start off at a high level on artificial intelligence and data centers. And not just technology check. Are you seeing a new slide right now? Artificial intelligence? Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of great research done on this, and one of the fellows I really like to reference is Mark Mills, and he released a study about a month ago on energy and AI, and the question is this a bubble or a trend? And his conclusion is it's a trend, and a couple data points. Nationally, we spend about $1 trillion on data centers and AI. It's going up to about $2 trillion. It's uniquely private capital. It's roughly 5% of gross domestic product, and that compares with the investment in interstate highway or the chemical industry in the late 1800s. And Mark brings the chemical industry to the point because he said it really revolutionized modern life and increased productivity. And he says the AI is doing the same thing. It's boosting our productivity from a GDP growth of somewhere around 1% a year to perhaps 4%, which means that this investment is sustainable. And then in addition, data centers and AI are a matter of national security as we're in a race with China. So Mark's conclusion is it's a trend, not a bubble. He also said we're going to need a lot of energy. And basically what he said is we're going to need natural gas in the short term and nuclear long term. And I'll get into that in a little bit more in a bit detail. First, let's take a look at this is electric power consumption in the United States for the last 70 or so years. And you can see from the 1950s to about 20 years ago, very rapid expanse. And then it flattened out in the 2010 area or so as we farmed out manufacturing and became more efficient. And so our use of electricity flattened out. And so that's kind of been the model we've been in. But now, of course, we're seeing that the trend is expected to go back up, and you'll hear unprecedented growth. Well, it's unprecedented in the last 20 years, but it's similar to what we did for 70 years prior. Okay, so but the problem is our systems, our processes, our regulation kind of went to sleep the last 20 years, and our muscle memory on expanding our power systems is not so good. So we gotta up our game on that. And then of course, what's driving this is a lot of it's data centers and reshoring manufacturing, and another major driver is space heating. Is a lot of states issue green energy mandates and out they ban natural gas heating, they're switching over to space heating. So those three things are really driving our electricity consumption. So it's on the way up. Now, what's fun to look at also is prices. So what's fun to look at is go back to when we first started with AC electricity in the United States, and it came in at almost $1 a kilowatt hour. And inflation adjusted, it's dropped down to about 18 cents a kilowatt hour now. So we've done a good job as an industry to lower it down. But I'll call your attention to the orange line on the bottom. That's the actual price. It's got an annoying uptick or a hockey stick the last few years. So what I'm going to do now is take the inflation adjustment away, and let's just look at the absolute electricity price for the last 115 years or so. And what you're going to see is that for the first 70 or so years, from 1913 to the 70s, the prices dropped. And why was that? And well, that's when we were building out our regional monopolies, vertically integrated regional monopolies overseen by a public service commission. And this was the design of Thomas Edison, but mostly Samuel Insull. He came up with that model, and it revolutionized the United States, and we electrified and we drove down costs. And so my title of my slide is Engineering, Economics, and Politics Drive the U.S. Well, for the first 70 years, it was engineering and economics, and then it seems like for the last 50 years, it's been a lot more politics. And so what happened? What was the big uptick in the 70s? Well, many of you are maybe as old as I am, you remember the Arab oil embargo and inflation. And then that drove prices up for 20 or so, 30 years. Then they stabilized again until deregulation by FERC Order 888. We thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if we deregulated these monopolies and tried to bring in the free market? Well, then prices shot up again. And then they stabilized until about 10 years ago. And then what happened was we went into this, what I call decarbonization. We started retiring a lot of our coal and gas generation and nuclear, and aggressively replacing it with wind and solar. And that started an upward trend in electricity prices. And I want to note, this is before the big push in data centers. So we are seeing a lot of electricity price increases right now, and a lot of it has its roots in a lot of these policies here. So if we want to take a look then at what happens to regions that grow their electric load or their electric output, they actually see decreasing prices. So here's a study done late last year by Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and they show that states that grow their electric systems actually reduce their prices. And it's simple as if you generate more megawatt hours, the cost per megawatt hour goes down. So there's some market information here that says more electricity generation can actually lower prices. And then another study, also very late last year, looked at just data centers. This was a study done by an outfit called E3, a very respected regional consulting firm. And basically what they found is that data centers more than pay for more than their fair share. And what that means is they'll come in and generate additional profit for the local utilities, which puts downward pressure on the prices for existing customers. And so what they found out is that just through market forces, and the data centers, they don't want to come to town and be the bad guy. So they're being pretty flexible with these arrangements, and it's had downward pressure on prices in addition to the jobs. The other thing that we're finding is that data centers are coming to town and bringing a lot of green energy with them, and I'll touch on that in Montana. So there's a lot of benefits to bringing data centers to town for a variety of reasons. Now, as we are retiring our coal and gas and adding more intermittent sources, our reliability is suffering. So this is a map of the analysis done by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, and they've rated 13 of 23 regions in the United States at elevated risk for blackouts in the next 10 years or so. And if your eyes are really good, you can see we're in the WEC or Northwest region, and they're projecting potential blackouts starting in 2029, which isn't too far away. And they're basically saying the same thing that Mark Mills was and others, that we're shutting down our coal, gas, and nuclear, and we're expanding intermittent sources. We're seeing load growth from a variety of reasons. Our regulation processes on our supply chains are kind of asleep because there's been 20 years of no growth, and now we got to figure out how to accelerate them. So that's the national picture. And we look at a regional study also by E3. Basically, they conclude the same thing. We're going to have a 9 gigawatt gap in the Northwest in another 4 years. 9 gigawatts is 3 times the amount of energy that Montana produces right now. It's about the same as the load in Oregon. And they also conclude the wind, solar, and battery are important, but they're only making small contributions. And they conclude that we need more natural gas in our region to balance the load versus generation equation. So now let's take a look at data centers in Montana. And there's a number you've heard out there, but there's 3 active projects that are late stage projects that I'm aware of, expansions in Montana. An Atlas data center in Butte for 150 megawatts, a Quantica substation in Broadview, northwest of Billings, that would initially be about 500 megawatts and potentially 1,000. And then a Saby data center in Butte that would start out in 50 and go to, say, 200 or 250. So a potential of, somewhere between 700 and 1,350 megawatts. So that's a lot. And I'll put this in perspective. This is a good percentage of the total output of Montana. Right now, our total generation capacity is around 7,000 megawatts if we could turn on all of our generators. So it's a big chunk. So then why Montana? And number one is our electricity is economical and reliable. Number two, very important, is we have a cool climate. So data centers use most of their energy on cooling. And so with an average outdoor temperature of, I think it was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, we've got a very favorable climate. Strong fiber optic network that's been built out over many decades. We've got great transportation. We've got an educated workforce and a favorable business environment. So then specifically, if we take a look at our electricity rates, and I know everybody's concerned about their electricity rates going up, and they have been, but Montana's got relatively inexpensive rates at about 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour versus the national average of 13, a little bit over 13.5. So that's part of why we're favorable for data centers. Now, if you look at our transmission network, it's a very strategic regional assets. And this is a map that shows our transmission lines. The color codes are the ownership, and the thickness of the line is the voltage. And so I would call your attention to see if I can use my arrow on it. It's over in the brown line that starts over in Colstrip and goes across the state, turns to green. And then this is our 500 kV line that then goes out to northern Idaho. And then I've also put our data centers on there. Those are the 3 black stars. And it's no magic on why they're locating where they're locating. They're at major transmission hubs in the state. The other thing I want to call your attention to is there's a dashed line that in the eastern part of the state that goes from north to south. That's the separation between the western and eastern U.S. grids. And so the next slide shows the western and eastern grids, and you'll see that most of Montana's on the west, but part of it's in the east. So presently right now, you can move energy inside of these different grid networks, but you can't move it across. And so Montana is strategically located between the two grids, which is opening up some possibilities. And so if you look now at our transmission capacities in and out of the state, you can see the big green arrows are how much electricity we can move in and out. And then I want to call your attention to what I call the North Plains Connector. That's a new DC line that's going to connect the eastern and western interconnects to the tune of about 3,000 megawatts. And so that's a major asset for the state of Montana to now be able to start moving energy. Well, why is that important? Well, the Dakotas have a lot of gas generation that we don't have. There's a lot of wind generation on the in the northern plains that now you can start bringing into Montana. And then if we develop more energy in Montana, we could start exporting out to that. So that's a very strategic regional asset. And so as these data centers start looking to locate in Montana, now they have options. If they need to bring energy from the other grids, they can do it. Or if they want to invest in their own generation and they have excess, they can ship it out to the other grids. So pretty cool. That's the good news. The bad news is the transmission capacity is pretty much maxed out. We can presently import about 2,700 megawatts through this network, and right now there's about 7% capacity available. So we need more transmission. Okay. So if we look at our generation, where do we get our generation from right now? The center of the picture, that's the Colstrip plant. We get about 37% of our energy from Colstrip. The next biggest chunk is the upper left. That's the hydro. And then in the lower right, we get about 22% out of wind. Excuse me. And then a very small amount out of natural gas, about 4%, and about 1% out of solar. So very, very little. So that's where we get our energy right now. And if you look at what trends are happening over the last 12 years, you'll see that we've retired 900 megawatts of coal. We've added about 900 megawatts of wind, 100 megawatts of solar. Excuse me, no change in our solar, and we've added 175 megawatts of gas. So we're doing similar to what the country's doing. We're shutting down a lot of our coal and we're adding wind. And as I'll show here in a minute, 900 megawatts of coal does not equal 900 megawatts of wind. Okay. So now if we look at what's planned to be constructed in Montana, so if you go look at the interconnection queue, this is what it looks like. It's 90-some% wind, solar, and battery. A very small amount of gas. Excuse me. And there's about 6,700 megawatts out there, which is about the total capacity that we presently have right now. The thing is that very little of this is actually going to be built. Excuse me, there's a huge backlog, and our whole system here in Montana and also nationally is kind of log jammed for generation. So very little of this is going to get built. So now if we take a look at how do you compare the output of 900 megawatts of coal versus 900 megawatts of wind. So it's called accreditation. So this is Northwestern Energy's accreditation. The red bar for natural gas says 202 megawatts of total capacity, which mean, and they accredit it, not 195. That means that 96% of that capacity, you can use 90, you can plan on 96% of that to reliably serve load. In other words, if I build 202 megawatts of natural gas generation, I can safely add 195 megawatts of natural gas. So then if you look at coal, it's at 93%. Hydros is 60%. It's because of seasonal flow. But now you look at wind, it's only 13%. So we've built 454 megawatts of wind generation in our network, but we can only reliably serve 59 megawatts of load because we're not sure the wind's going to blow on any given day. And then solar is about 5% capacity. So this is the challenge now that you can kind of see as we switch from gas and coal to wind and solar. That's why reliability starts to suffer. Okay. Now let's take a look at natural gas. We've got a very inexpensive natural gas, probably the first, second, or third lowest cost in the United States. But the thing is, we import half of it. And then these green lines, that's the gas transmission lines that Northwestern Energy runs. And the taupe or brown color, that's WBI in the eastern part of the state. And the reason that we're able to do it so cheap is we have a bunch of underground storage. That's all these red circles I've shown here. And we're able to store a lot of our gas underground. So we buy it when it's cheap, and then we store it underground and then use it in the when the prices are higher. So pretty crafty design. Now, if you look at our total gas consumption, you can see we're about 80,000 million cubic feet per day, and you'll see that most of it's space heating in industrial, commercial, and residential, and very little electrical. So the moral of the story is here, if we want to grow our electricity consumption, it's going to be a major impact on our gas transmission network. And right now, here's what our gas usage looks like. And I want to call your attention to that red circle right there I just highlighted. The dashed red line is our capacity. This is last year. The black line shows our daily use. So there in February, we were right at capacity. And that's when we need a lot of space heating. And so basically what it says is our system during the peak usage is at capacity. And so the black line is our usage, which peaks in the winter, low in the summer. The blue area is gas we're bringing in from our neighbors. The gray area is the gas we're pulling out of storage. And the green area is gas that sits in the pipelines, okay? And then that red maroon sine wave in there, that's the amount of gas we have in storage. So the moral of the story is our system's at capacity. If you want to build a lot more gas generation, we're going to need to build more gas transmission. So now if we take a look at a day-by-day energy usage, the yellow line here is our production. So we produce about maybe up to 3,000 megawatts a day. The blue line is our consumption. And so we got about a peak in the morning and the peak in the evening, and that repeats every day. And then, so we use about half of what we produce, and then we export the rest. That's generally the mode we've been in. And now if we take a look at where does that come from, the green line here is wind energy. You can see it's intermittent. We take whatever we can get, and it can go from over 1,000 megawatts in the beginning of this week, a couple weeks ago, down to say 0. And then the brown line, that's Colstrip. So Colstrip, we throttle that back and forth to kind of compensate for these changes in the wind so that we can match our generation and load. The light blue lines are hydro, pretty steady this time of year. The taupe line at the bottom, that's our natural gas, and we throttle that back and forth to balance everything. And then the purple line at the bottom, that's petroleum. And then the solar is the yellow that's there during noontime every day, okay? So we're dominant with coal, wind, and hydro to balance the checkbook, okay? So now let's take a look at our long-term plan. And this is Northwestern Energy's 20-year integrated resource plan. So the left here is today, 2026, and the far right is 2046, 2045. And then the different colors represent which generation they're planning on using. So the gray is Colstrip, and then coal, and then the orange is natural gas, the blue is hydro, then the green is wind, and the yellow solar, and then the brown up there, that's what they purchase off the market. And then the black dash line is what they're projecting load growth to be. So so one thing to note is they're projecting very modest load growth in what they call their base case. And then the solid black line above that, that's their reserve margin. So they're going to try to add up all the resources to get to that top black line. Okay, so what do they see? We're resource sufficient right now, which is good. And this is actually for the first time since deregulation 20 some years ago that Northwestern Energy is resource adequate. And that's because they recently acquired more shares of Colstrip. from Avista. But you'll start to see in 2031 and certainly by 2042 huge gaps. And so basically what's happening, well, in 2042, they're modeling Colstrip shutting down. Okay, so now we have in 2042, we've got somewhere around a 1 gigawatt gap. You'll also see that natural gas, the orange, is getting smaller. Well, they've got a net zero goal and they're planning on not building any more natural gas after 2035. Okay, so now how do we plug this gap here out in the 2040s? Okay, so let's look at that. And then what do we do if data centers come to town? Okay, so that's what the next slide is going to talk to. So the bar on the left, their base case, they're saying to plug that gap with no data centers, we're going to put some orange stuff here. What's the orange? That's battery. They're going to try to firm up some of their intermittent wind. The gray is they're going to build some more natural gas until 2035. And then the red is they're going to build some nuclear reactors, small modular nuclear reactors. And that's their plan A to plug the gap. And then up above there, the blue line, the $41, that's their expected cost per megawatt hour, which is pretty good for that base case. Okay. Now they model 3 different data center scenarios. The first bar is 150 megawatts of data center. The second one is 650, third one 1160. And what they're doing, first thing they do, there's the black at the bottom of each one of those little pillars. That's 370 megawatts of Colstrip that they recently acquired from Puget Sound Energy. They're going to roll that back into the rate base, and that's enough to provide for probably the Atlas and the Sabey data centers in western Montana. And look at what it does to cost. It drops their cost from 41 down to 35. So that power is bought and paid for and cheap. So if anybody tells you coal power is expensive, here's some data that says, no, it's not so expensive. So it lowers their costs, which is cool. So now if they start building more or needing more data centers, their plan is more natural gas, that's more gray, and then a little bit more wind. And then if there's a whole lot of data centers, a lot more gas, and then perhaps some solar. So the moral of the story here, and also the costs then stay somewhere in the $42 per megawatt hour. So there is not upward pressure on costs as they grow. So they're factoring in new gas pipelines, new transmission lines, the whole bit. So here's a data point that says, that it's not necessarily going to drive up costs. And in fact, I think it's going to have some downward pressure. Okay. All right. So now if we take a look at what are data centers going to do, they've got choices. They can go buy from Northwestern Energy and go through the Public Service Commission. And if they do that, they have to go in front of the Public Service Commission and demonstrate that this attachment will not increase rates. That's one option. Second option, they can go to the market. They can go buy power from whomever, and then that's overseen by FERC. They'll need to run through either our Western Electric Coordinating Council transmission network or Northwestern's, and that would not be part of the rate base. Or the third option is they can bring their own energy. And so Northwestern Energy is planning to go forward with what they call a large load tariff. That's basically the parameters, the duration, and the price of the contract between the data center and the utility. They're planning to take this in front of the Public Service Commission to comply with that statute. And then one sentence in here, basically they say large load customers may need to provide their own energy resources. So we'll take a closer look at that in a minute before we wrap up here. So here's the Sabey data center in Butte. And so their demand is going to be somewhere between 50 and 200 megawatts. Their plan A is to go to Northwestern and use some of that 370 megawatts of Colstrip capacity that Puget Sound granted to Northwestern earlier this year, and that all the infrastructure costs, there will need to be some transmission upgrades, probably from the Garrison substation down to Silver Bow, and those costs will be picked up by Sabey data centers. Okay, so that's their plan A. Go use the existing Northwestern capacity. And now let's take a look at Broadview. This is the project proposed by Quantica, and their plan is basically to generate some on-site in a mix of wind, solar, and battery. And so I've done a artist rendition of that here. And what they'll be able to do is generate on a good day 3 gigawatts. And so that squiggly line I show there in the chart, that's actually what the wind generation looked like in Montana a couple weeks ago. Okay, so this isn't exactly what would be produced there, but it's close. And then the dashed line is 1 gigawatt. So their data center is going to consume 1 gigawatt. They could some days produce 3 gigawatts, but you'll see if they just used wind energy from Montana 2 weeks ago, their data center would shut down every day, day and a half. Okay. So what they need firm energy. Okay. And so what their one plan then for this would be to go ahead and ship that out to the grid, to the Western Electric Coordinating Council grid, and then buy back 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt of firm energy. So it's a pretty cool picture. They'll produce all the energy they need. They just need to firm it up a little bit so that it's there day in, day out. And that's what the grid's good at doing. There's a lot of inertia and gas peakers and so forth out there. So this is a pretty cool picture of how to bring 3 gigawatts of green energy to Montana and mostly power a data center. So pretty cool idea. And I might add that nobody else, you looked at Northwestern's plan, they don't have hardly any wind, battery, have some battery, but very little wind and solar on their plan. So it's a pretty cool idea. Okay. So now just before I wrap up, there's some activity going on the executive and legislative initiatives. So the governor's energy task force that I'm a part of and the Energy Technology Interim Committee of the legislature is watching all this, looking for what can we do to eliminate roadblocks for development in Montana. And I think the number one finding, or my big learning from working in these groups, is that there's a lot of uncertainty that's discouraging investment in Montana. There's a lot of capital out there, but it's on the sidelines, okay? And we need to figure out how to bring that to Montana. The other thing is we need probably on the order of $10 billion of investment in transmission, electric and gas, and in generation in Montana. And quite frankly, we don't have the capital here in the state to pay for it. So when we built Costrip and the 500 kV lines, we had a regional consortium come in and invest in Montana, and we need to do that again. And so I see data centers as a one way to do that again. And so the other thing so some of the areas we're focusing on these commissions is the transmission grid. We're looking at Public Service Commission reform. We're looking at large load tariffs, maybe standing up an energy authority. What gas transmission, what can we do to expand that? Nuclear permitting, and there's also quite a bit of work being done right now on research in geothermal energy, and so we're looking to contribute to that. So basically, to wrap up, what we need to do in Montana is build a diverse portfolio of everything. And we need to keep Colstrip running until we have a replacement ready to go. We need to expand our transmission systems, both in gas transmission and generation and electric. We need to invest in nuclear. We need to reconsider net zero goals. So if we're not sure we can have a nuclear plant running in 2042, I certainly don't want to start shutting down any gas plants before we do that. We may need to build some more. And then finally, we need to encourage investment in Montana. Data centers are great, but any kind of regional investment in our grid will be a step in the right direction. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.